Please turn your.
Okay, we are recording and we're going to get started. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our panel discussion titled Navigating LGBTQIA Identity Abroad as part of Study Abroad Week. My name is Evan Basio, and I am the Education Abroad Coordinator in the Temple Education Abroad Office. I studied abroad in Buenos Aires, Argentina for a semester, and then lived in Madrid, Spain for 2 years after graduating from Penn State. As someone who identifies as a member of the LGBTQIA+ community, I am very excited for today's discussion and to hopefully hear some stories that I could relate to. I'm just so excited to hear what our students have to say. Some logistical reminders for this session. Panel is best viewed with speaker view turned on, which you can adjust at the top right corner of your screen. So it might be automatically in gallery view, but speaker view might be better. We will be recording the session to distribute to registrants and may post clips to our social media accounts as well. So after meeting our moderator and panelists, we'll have about 45 minutes of moderated Q&A, followed by an opportunity for all attendees to ask questions. So during the session, you may post your questions in the chat, and I'll be sure to pose them to our panelists towards the end, or you can wait until the end to take yourself off mute to ask a question as well. Before moving forward, please allow me to read a land acknowledgement, which will be followed by a brief moment of silence. We acknowledge that we live and work on land that is home to the Lenni Lenape, the original stewards of what is now known as Philadelphia and its surrounding lands. We honor and pay respects to the caretakers of these lands and commit to uplift the voices of its community members. Thank you. So today we'll be hearing from 5 Temple students who identify as members of the LGBTQIA+ community who have either studied abroad or are studying abroad right now. Our panelists will explore their experiences with race, gender, sexuality, and intersectionality in a global context and how they relate to foreign culture, politics, and language. We will learn more about how students engaged with the community while abroad and what they ultimately brought back home from those experiences. It's important to note that each student's experience abroad is uniquely their own, and that our panelists have very generously agreed to share their personal stories in this space with us. With that said, I would like to ask that the panelists introduce themselves, and here are their lovely photos. So I'm going to start with Amir. Amir, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. Yeah, first of all, welcome everyone. Thank you for sharing space with us today. My name is Amir. I am a second-year peer advisor in the Education Abroad office where I am right now. So if you see the map behind me, that's what that is. Yeah, I am a junior psychology major with a double minor in dance and gender sexuality and women's studies. If you hear an accent, it's because I am from Cape Town, South Africa. So I moved to Philadelphia to begin college at Temple. And so I am technically studying abroad right now. Yeah, I love the international community at Temple and the Education Abroad folks, and am super excited to talk about Temple's education abroad opportunities all the time, but also love talking about queer things and how those two things intersect. So I'm really excited to be here today.
Thanks, Amir. Liam.
Hi, everyone. Once again, thanks so much for coming. I'm super excited that everyone's here. I am a first-year peer advisor in the Education Abroad office. I previously was the Spanish outreach assistant last year, but I'm super excited to be have a more incorporated role in the office this year. I am in a 4+1 program, so I'll be getting my bachelor's degree in Spanish with a minor in Italian and Latin American studies, and I'll be getting my master's degree in foreign language education. I'm currently in my 4th year, so I'm pressing on towards my 5th year. And yeah, I'm really excited. Thanks again for being here, everyone.
Thank you, Liam. Next, we have Chiara.
Hi, everyone. My name's Chiara, and I'm a senior here at Temple University. This is my first year as a study abroad ambassador, and I hope to get more involved with the study abroad program at Temple, even after I graduate. But I'm currently an environmental studies major with my GIS certificate, and I studied abroad in Rome this past summer, summer one, and I identify as a bisexual woman, and I'm excited to talk with all of you today.
Thanks, Chiara. Next, Emma, would you please introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Emma. This is also my first year being a study abroad ambassador. I am a junior graphic design major, and I was in Tokyo last semester, and I'm very excited to talk to you all today.
Thank you, Emma. And lastly, but certainly not least, MG.
Hi, everyone. I'm MG. Yeah, I'm in the bottom right photo. I look vastly different, but that's me. I studied at National Taiwan University spring 2020, and I'm majoring in speech therapy and minoring in Chinese.
Thank you, MG. Thank you, all of you. And lastly, I would like to introduce our lovely moderator. So joining us today and moderating this conversation is Dr. Jen Pollitt. Dr. Pollitt is an assistant professor and the assistant director of gender, sexuality, and women's studies at Temple. Her courses have included human sexuality, men and masculinities, foundations of women's studies, and research seminar. In addition to teaching, she lectures and facilitates workshops for both academic and professional audiences, including co-founding Empathy A Work LLC and organizing the Men and #MeToo conference in Philadelphia in 2019. She received her PhD in human sexuality from Widener University and is a member of Gamma Eta Rho, the National Honor Society in Sexuality. So thank you so much, Dr. J, for being here today and moderating this conversation. And with that said, I will hand it over to you.
Awesome. So welcome, everyone. I'm really jazzed to be here. Thank you so much to Evan, your whole team, for all the panelists for organizing this. Thank you so much, Amir, one of my former students and hopefully current students in the future again, for inviting me to moderate today. I am so excited to ask you these questions and to hear your answers, and for me also to learn more about the study abroad program, especially for our LGBT students, since in GSWS there are a bunch of them. So without further ado, I'll ask my first question. So just briefly, whoever would like to start, why did you choose to study abroad? What was it about study abroad that was appealing to you? And Liam, if you want to start us off, we can start there.
Sure. Well, I chose to study abroad for a couple of reasons. It really pertains to my major. As a Spanish major, I felt like I was going to get a lot of benefits out of going abroad. I forgot to mention where I went while I was introducing myself. I studied abroad in Quito, Ecuador, my first year, second semester, and then I went abroad again to Oviedo, Spain, with the Temple in Spain program. So I got to live with a host family both times, both really different experiences, but at the same time, very similar experiences. And I gained a lot out of it, and I really progressed in my major and with my ability. So for me, it was an educational advancement, but also I just learned a lot about myself going abroad, and about sort of how the world, for lack of a better word, just how the world works, like in reality. Like we can learn about different societies abroad in different environments, but it's completely different once you're there. So I've definitely been able to bring a lot back here, and it's changed my world perspective a bit. I would definitely say for the better.
Awesome, Liam. And I'm excited to hear more about that in just a little bit. So thank you so much. Emma, if you want to go next.
Sure. Yeah. I was one of those people that I started touring colleges when I was like a freshman in high school. And I chose Temple based on their art school and the study abroad program. So I knew I wanted to go to Tokyo when I was, way before I actually went. And, we were still able to go with COVID happening. but I needed to get out of Pennsylvania for a little bit, and I thought Japan would be a great option. I love the city. I love living in Philadelphia, but Tokyo is probably a little cooler than Philadelphia. So I had a really fun time. And I also was able to kind of introduce myself to a bunch of new people with my identity that I've become more comfortable with over the years. And that was a very validating experience to get to meet new people and be myself and then get to, spend time in Japan, which is awesome. So.
Awesome, Emma. I love that. Yeah, I think that under COVID land, we could all use a little vacation sometimes from Philadelphia since we've all been bound here for a little bit. So Chiara, do you want to go next?
Yeah, of course. And please let me know if I sound a little choppy. For some reason, whenever I'm in these study abroad meetings, my internet decides to say it's unstable. But the reason I studied abroad was originally an academic decision. I believe having a world perspective is so important. And I just knew it was a great opportunity to do. And it was something I considered in high school, but when I was younger, I wasn't quite ready. But I knew when I was in college that it was an experience that I was really ready to do, because it is, living on your own for a number of weeks. So it was a life-changing experience. And I didn't realize how much I would grow as an individual and comfortable in my identity when I was doing it, which is why I'm here on this panel now, because, it's like an outcome that it was like a benefit. It's something I didn't expect originally when I was studying abroad. It was all like an academic decision. And then being abroad with my peers that, were so accepting of my identity was like a little bonus. So I wanted to definitely share that here today.
Oh, great. And I would love to come back around to that too, if we have time for more questions at the end. Thank you, Chiara. Amir, next.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of in contrary to what everyone else has been saying, I chose to study abroad to be in an international experience, studying at Temple in Philly. I kind of chose Temple also based on our study abroad opportunities, which I have a Virgo mother, and so it turned into quite the planner myself. And so when choosing Temple, I already knew the professor I wanted to take for French, and then already knew the study abroad program I wanted to do because that professor ran it, because it was at Temple. And so I haven't been able to go on that program just yet because of COVID, canceling it the last couple of summers in a row. But yeah, I also chose Temple because of our study abroad opportunities available. I chose to go outside of my context of living and growing up in Cape Town, South Africa, because I grew up in a global context. My parents are and the rest of my family are from the US, and so they are world travelers themselves, have both lived in countries other than the US, and were interested in giving that experience to their children, and so imparted in both me and my sister a travel and wanderlust for the world, but also like a real yearning for global education and what that uniquely can bring to you, as opposed to just living and working in the same context your entire life. That gives you one experience, but it is a single narrative. And so to be able to explore the world through a truly immersive experience, as in living there and working there and being fully immersed in the culture, the friendships, the family, that's a different vibe than just kind of going and visiting for a couple weeks or even a month. So I knew it was just going to, grow exponentially, first of all, from college in general, but then also from going specifically kind of to the opposite side of the world. So that's my short answer.
Awesome. I think after this, everyone that's in attendance is going to want to go and hop on a plane and go somewhere else. I already feel the wanderlust becoming stronger and stronger, even in the first few minutes. So MG, how about you?
Yeah, sure. I think it was just ever since I was really young, I was very curious on what was outside of just Pennsylvania. I grew up here my whole life, except I was adopted from China. So it was oh, what is out there? And having an aunt that always came to visit during the summer, but leave to go back to Taiwan during the rest of the year, I always felt I guess an empty piece. And I was I want to do what she's doing. And I didn't exactly know I wanted to study abroad at Taiwan. It was more when I was in high school, I met a Japanese exchange friend. And I was like, wow, this is actually a thing I can do. Like, and that's when I realized studying abroad was an option for me, and it turned into a passion.
Excellent. Oh my gosh, thank you so much for sharing. When you think about your desire to study abroad, how big of a factor was your identity as a member of the LGBTQIA plus community when choosing a program or destination? So what part did that play in kind of navigating and creating your study abroad experience? Whoever wants to go first.
I can go ahead. Yeah, so when I graduated high school, or honestly before that, when I was choosing schools and choosing to move to the US, I didn't know I was gay. So didn't have that as a framework for kind of analysis, but that was the kind of identity conversation as a whole was a framework for sure that I was looking through as someone who walks through the world with albinism and also through a Black female context. That was an important decision, choosing to go to a school that was diverse, that was in a city that was diverse, that had multiple cultural contexts within it. Philly is a super, culturally, I hate the melting pot phrase, but it is a bit of a melting pot in that there are so many different communities that have settled in Philly, immigrant communities, African communities, just like different kinds of people. And so I was like, if I'm going to choose a city in a country that I know has, a troubled past and a troubled present with identity politics, I wanted it to be one where I knew I was going to be at a school that was going to be able to hold that identity for me, in a city that was going to be able to hold that identity for me. And I didn't even know I would need it even more when I came out. And so it just turned into more and more of an important factor for me, but was from the beginning.
Oh, thanks, Amir. Philadelphia is so lucky to have you, and so is Temple. Yeah, was for Chiara, Emma, Liam, MG, were your experiences similar in terms of what you were looking for, or how you were navigating your identity and the study abroad process, or even the thought of studying abroad?
I definitely wasn't picking the city based off of how I knew that they would receive me, but in more of a negative light, I guess. Like, I'm used to not talking about my identity for either safety purposes or just to like make things easier on people around me, which is never fun. So I was just planning on doing that again. And then when I got there, there was a lot of people who were very accepting, but they were all American students. So I did kind of still kind of keep my identity to myself for the most part. I mean, I'm not going to go up to, a local and explain myself to them. But I was still well received by the students that I lived with. And that was still like a really positive experience for me. So I think that was the better part of it, is I didn't have to hide anything.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that, Emma. Liam, I saw that you were also.
Yeah, I share a lot of the same sentiment. Like, I suppose in the US, I don't necessarily explain my identity as much, just because I have the privilege of not necessarily being questioned about it a lot. So for me, going abroad, similar to Emma, I was kind of prepared just not to talk about my identity. I went abroad to Ecuador, which is in Latin America, and I went abroad in Europe. So I had two different kind of thought processes going into both of those experiences after having classes, studying Latin American culture. Like, I was well prepared for like possible, mindsets that I might have to like confront, whether it's like living with a host family, because, that wasn't necessarily something that I thought they were taking into consideration. Like, I might be with a host family who doesn't support LGBTQ plus like individuals with that program. Personally, but going abroad to Europe, like, I had a little bit of a different mindset, whereas like, okay, I was just more familiar with the culture there. So I think it's possible that, I might be able to engage in those conversations there a little bit more. But I share a lot of the same sentiment as Emma.
Thanks so much, Liam. MG or Chiara, do you have anything that you'd like to share for this particular question?
Yeah, I can go. So when I was deciding where to study abroad, I knew like I wanted to like strengthen my Chinese. So I was deciding between China and Taiwan. And so it was really, my decision was really based on like the language, the culture. And it just so happened that I decided Taiwan since they had like also some more English speaking classes. So it was like a good hybrid. I wasn't really thinking about like the LGBT aspect of it. But what was great was that like Taiwan is like LGBT marriage is legal. So that's like that was a really great thing there. So I felt like pretty accepted, and but I didn't really like I guess like come out or anything. But if there were ever like discussions with like other students, like I was comfortable enough to like talk about it with them and they were accepting.
Thanks so much, MG. What about you, Chiara? Do you have anything you'd like to contribute to this question?
Yeah, I'm surprised how similar Liam and Emma's experiences are to mine. You know, I've been living with my identity for a long time, so I was kind of prepared to go like business as usual, not really talk about my identity with my peers until I got a good feel of, you know, what their opinions were on it. And I was more focused on the academic aspect and that I was just going to do the 6 weeks in Rome, not really thinking necessarily about my identity, but thinking about like classes and credits and just being abroad. But then when I was there, I had peers that were in the LGBTQ plus community who were very open about it. And all my peers were so accepting and so loving of them. So I kind of realized that like, if I was unapologetic and I was, you know, just honest about my identity, that, you know, my peers would respect me. And it was really nice to kind of get a feeling of like what it could be like to be completely out. So that was just it was a big moment for me in more ways than I realized it would be.
Oh, thanks so much, Chiara. So it sounds like really from a majority of your experiences, you know, like the meme, like expectation, reality, your expectations were somewhat different going in, and then the reality demonstrated to be something different. So if you could speak to a little bit, what was your expectation before going, and then what was the reality actually once you were there? So did you ever feel like your identity would not be understood or accepted? So it sounds like a lot of folks were navigating that in different ways, but yeah, how did you manage your expectations versus then your reality? And whoever wants to go first, feel free.
I can speak to this a little bit. Since like gay marriage is not necessarily legal in all of Japan, and they're a pretty private culture anyways on a lot of things, I was kind of mentally preparing myself to not be around queer people for a while. That is when I'm most comfortable, is when I'm around queer people. And being an art student in Philadelphia, I'm usually surrounded by a lot of peers. So I was trying to prepare myself to kind of like be alone in that sense. And that did kind of live up to my expectations. Like I didn't really meet a lot of other Japanese students or adults or teachers who identified as queer. So the American students that I did interact with that were part of the community, that was a good experience. But it is weird to be away from the community for a little while, and it wasn't a bad thing. I mean, I had a great time, but you know, I did miss like that that familiar energy, I guess.
Yeah. What about the rest of you folks? Did you have a similar experience or something different?
I had like a moment which I'll remember for the rest of my life, for like the reality clicked of like what I was living in. When I was in Spain, I was studying abroad in like the north, which is more traditional, and I was sort of expecting to just, you know, not bring up my identity ever, because, you know, I have the privilege of being able to do that. But one night I was like at dinner with my host family, and we were in the kitchen, and my host family had like a history of having a lot of host students, and like they're all part of the family. And my host mom, this is all in Spanish too, so that'll play a different part later, but she's telling me like our like 2 host students ago, we had this boy Joseph who like we love to death. Like she was on the phone with him still, like every night. Like they talk, he's still in Spain, like teaching English. And he was gonna leave like 2 weeks into being in Spain with them. And he was like crying in his bedroom one night, and she asked him why. And he was like, I feel like I haven't been honest with you. Like I'm gay, and I don't, like he was planning a trip home. He was planning to go home early because he was having this internal conflict. And she had this moment with him where, you know, she expressed to him like she's accepting of that, and like their whole family is accepting of that. And for me, it was like, wow, like what are the chances that this host family has had like another gay student like who's kind of feeling the same way I was. I mean, I wasn't ready to hop on a plane to come home, but I like everyone has a different experience. But for me, it was like, oh my gosh, like the reality is like there are, even around the world, there are people who, you know, are supportive of, you know, like different identities that are seen as non-traditional. And, you know, it was that moment where I tried to explain to her like that I'm bisexual, or, you know, that I'm just like queer. And she like, I think it went over her head that I'm like into men and women, but she definitely got the part about me being gay and like into men. So that was fine. I probably didn't explain myself well in Spanish, but it was just like a really like nice moment where I felt like I connected with my host family. That was just like, it was like the reality clicked in.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Liam. I think that what really stands out to me in that story is that we oftentimes, I think, can paint, you know, things with really broad brushes and make generalizations, but really we have to remember that like the world is full of tons of amazing humans. And despite all of the headline news about all the awful things that are experienced in the LGBT community, there's a lot of really good people out there too who are looking to support everyone and be great allies. So thanks. Yeah, does anyone else want to talk about your expectations versus reality once you were abroad? All right, I'll move on to our next question. So while you were you able to utilize any resources that you found helpful to navigate your identity abroad? So specifically to navigate your LGBTQIA queer identity, were there any resources that you thought really were super?
I did get the chance to talk to other ambassadors before I went, which was just I had signed up for the emails. The ambassador profiles were in the emails. I reached out to some people. There's a lot of people from my high school that go to Temple, and there was a few people from my high school that had gone to Tokyo. So reaching out to other students and learning about their experiences, I found very helpful.
Awesome. Does everyone agree with that? And did you do that as well?
For me, like YouTube was like a huge resource, like seeing other like vloggers. There's like so many people who are like documenting their travels, and like a lot of them identify as part of the LGBTQ plus community. So not, maybe their content isn't necessarily centered around their identity. However, you can see what their day-to-day life moving through like, you know, like a foreign or society, like as themselves. So for me, like just like watching them live their lives on YouTube and like sharing with the world was really helpful.
Yeah. Did anyone else look at like other people's travel Instagrams or YouTube channels or vlogs? Were those resources that y'all use as well? I see a couple nodding heads. Yeah, go ahead, Amir.
I did not, but I was thinking of an answer to this question because it's kind of hard to like translate my experience to what the rest of y'all have experienced, but I'm glad I'm kind of offering a different perspective in that way. But yeah, I was thinking back to like experiences in high school and like what my understanding of queerness was in my South African context versus like being transplanted into the middle of Philadelphia. And then thinking like since coming out, what those resources have looked like for me, even though they've been, you know, predominantly American resources since I live here. I was like reminded of my first GSWS classes were with Dr. J, and was reminded of like the experience of sitting in, well, first of all, it was on Zoom, so I'm not sitting, but sitting in my room alone in a Zoom room with like, you know, let's say 30, 40 other people who you kind of through conversation come to understand that, oh my God, let's say like 80% of these people are queer. Never happened. Revolutionary experience to be like sitting in a room of other only queer people. Just because I like hadn't sought those experiences out because I wasn't out and like maybe hadn't quite come to terms with that understanding of my identity before. So the GSWS department at Temple has been a really great resource for me because just like that experience in itself of like being able to be fully immersed in other LGBTQIA plus students is just like, I mean, at a certain point you're like, oh my God, we all are saying the same thing. But it's just such a lovely feeling for the first times to be like, whoa, like everyone else is gay. That's crazy. So that as an answer to your question was what it reminded me of.
Amazing. And already we can see in this like brief half an hour chat that community keeps coming up, like finding people that you can talk to and you're like, oh, wait, me too, me too. And I'm really glad that you love GSWS because we feel like a big cozy family. I too am a member of the LGBTQIA community. And I've often thought a lot about my own identity when I'm deciding where to travel or where to study or, you know, where conferences are being held next. So I appreciate all that. If we're thinking about your experiences so far, did any of you have experience with gender inclusive language used in your host country? So for example, either in English or another language. So maybe using gender neutral ending in Spanish as opposed to the A or the O. How did you navigate more inclusive language there? Or was it navigable? Was it something that was even an option?
For me, it was difficult in Italy to use that sort of language because all their terms are very gendered to be either, you know, like a female object or a male object. So that was something that I'm not aware of if there is more gender neutral words to use in Italy. I feel like that's still a very up and coming thing in the Italian language. So I would love to hear other people's responses to that, but that was just from my experience. I didn't hear a lot of that.
Thank you so much, Chiara. Yeah, what were the rest of your experiences with language?
As someone who's like studying to be a foreign language educator, this is something that's really been in the back of my mind lately. When I was going through high school, like I was not taught gender neutral endings. However, they are up and coming, you know, they're starting to be used more and more. I don't have any experience abroad using them. However, my professor this semester, she's the first professor I've ever had that uses gender inclusive language in the classroom. And it's really not that difficult. All you have to do is add an E instead of an O or an A to everything, which, well, not to everything, just to, you know, when referring to people. And it's something that I'm gonna implement, of course, into my like future language teaching classrooms. I'm also doing observations at my old high school right now. So and the other day we were learning these endings and my teacher actually included gender inclusive language and explained to the class that, hey, like this is not in your textbook because we need to update it, but this is something that you need to know. And it's interesting that like just a couple of years ago, I was literally sitting in that same exact class and I was not taught that. And I've been thinking about this. And now that I'm watching one of my old teachers teach it, they've revised their lesson to like include more people. So I'm really excited about like that aspect of identity and like navigating through language.
That is thrilling. I'm really excited about that. As study abroad students, do you feel like you were bringing a gender inclusive language lens to your study abroad and it stood out more how gendered language was? And did you have an urge to want to go in and create new language or use more gender neutral language? All right. All right, we'll skip on to our next question. So how did your study abroad or for those of you that are familiar with intersectionality, I'll give a brief definition for those who are not. Coined in 1989 by Professor Kimberly Crenshaw, the term intersectionality refers to a lens for seeing the way in which various forms of inequality often exacerbate each other. Crenshaw first used the term during a 1970s court case to show that treating Black women as purely women or purely Black ignores the specific challenges that Black women face as a group. Now, intersectionality can refer to all aspects of identity, from race and gender to sexuality, socioeconomic status, ability status, immigration status, and more. With that said, how did you navigate your intersecting identities while studying abroad? And whoever would like to go first can go. Did you feel like you had to navigate your intersecting identities? And if so, how did you do that?
I can go first. Yeah. So I was actually just chatting to Evan about this earlier today because I am in a constant kind of cycle of navigating that as I continue to experience Philadelphia, continue to experience and expand on my understanding of my different identities and how they intersect, and also how I'm viewed in the world, in the different parts of the world that I live. So I am surrounded dearly by the second generation African community at Temple. I am the captain of Temple's only African dance team, and have chosen to really implement myself deeply into the African community at Temple in order to kind of have that piece of home with me, but specifically within the dance community, because that's one of my big passions and what I've been doing my whole life. But coming along with that is the latent homophobia that the immigrant community in America tends to be labeled with often, but specifically West African homophobia, because as we know, LGBTQI plus identity is often illegal still in different countries in West Africa. Unfortunately, that translates to parents telling their kids, and then their kids being raised in the US and being raised around more open queerness potentially, but also growing up with that same kind of perspective on the world. And so I interact with the African community at Temple often, and am sometimes reminded of how I present, which surprises me because sometimes in the US, in Philly specifically, and at like a liberal arts university, you can kind of forget that like being queer is not, well, specifically within like certain pockets of Temple, you can forget that being queer is not like the majority, or if you have only queer friends and are in all GSWS classes, you can be like, oh my goodness, like this is just like the way the world is. And then you step outside of that bubble sometimes and you're just like, whoa, like this is wild. So I had an experience recently where I was reminded of how my identities intersect, because even though I fit very quickly into the understanding of we're sitting in a community of 15 people and everyone's Black and everyone's African of some context, and everyone's a Temple student and everyone's a junior and everyone's, between 21 and 23, but all of those intersecting identities still leave me and my partner on the outside of it because we're queer on top of that. And so that's always an interesting experience to have when, you feel like you're in the middle of it and then like someone says something or something is said and all the heads turn and look at you, and then you go from the middle of that circle to right outside of it looking in all of a sudden, and you're like, it's so disorienting because you're like, how did I get here? I thought we were all on the same page, because there can be a veneer that is created, that false comfortability that can come from having the privilege of experiencing your identity in a way where it's not threatened 24/7. So I acknowledge that that's not an experience I'm having because I'm surrounded and specifically curated a community where that isn't the case. But yeah, it's always a wild experience when it does.
Yeah, thank you so much, Amir, for sharing that. What about everyone else? How have you navigated your intersecting identities? Or have you felt like you've had to navigate those things? And if so, in what ways?
I did have a little bit of an experience trying to introduce myself to like 50 new people, and I'm a lesbian and also gender nonconforming. And for some Japanese students, they've never heard of either of those things. And it's not always fun to explain yourself, especially when you struggle with your own identity or the journey that you've taken to come to terms with it. And sometimes you don't even have the answers. And I think trying to explain myself to new people in a way that they can understand me, but something that was comfortable for me to share something so personal was difficult. But I mean, generally, people received it well. It's hard to put it into terms for people who have never heard of it. So that was a new experience, but
yeah, it sounds like you did navigate that with a lot of grace and poise. And of course, it's not any of your individual jobs to teach the whole world or to teach the population that's in front of you. But so I'm grateful that they were receptive and appreciative of that work and of your labor. Yeah, how about anyone else? Liam or MG or Chiara, your experiences with navigating your intersecting identities?
Yeah, I can speak a little bit on this. It kind of also goes back to the expectation question of like what my expectation was. I just had kind of a thought that I can't believe I forgot about earlier. But Rome is very Catholic, it's where the Pope lives. So that was a bit of a concern of mine when I was going there. I was worried that not only would I just not bring up my identity, I'd have to really be careful on maybe hiding my identity. But as I got more comfortable with my peers and I was going out in groups, I was lucky enough to kind of be out with my identity. And I was lucky enough to not feel like the Italian citizens were uncomfortable around me. I was fortunate enough to kind of be able to just exist and not receive, maybe judgmental looks or, strange looks because, I was comfortable being surrounded by, peers that I knew accepted me.
Gotcha. Thank you so much, Chiara. So yeah, community again coming up too. So if we're thinking about identities, how do you think that your study abroad experience affected your understanding of identity within a global context? We've touched on this a little bit with some individual stories, but if you can speak a little bit more in detail about how your experience specifically affected your identity or your understanding of your identity in this global context.
I can touch on that. Yeah. So it's really interesting. First of all, like I said, I wasn't out and now I am. So there's that part of my identity that has developed in the global context. But on top of that, when I first started dating my current partner, we were navigating coming from two different global contexts. She's from Jamaica and I am from South Africa. And so that's an interesting experience. She's been in America a little longer than I had been when we first started dating. And so America's affinity for gendering and labeling has affected like her views of like the LGBTQIA plus identity and community in America more so than mine, because I came straight from South Africa. So for example, the understanding of like gender presentation within the lesbian community of like a femme who's someone who dresses more femininely versus a stud who's someone who dresses more masculinely and also is Black versus a masc presenting person. Those are categories within lesbianism that just like didn't exist in my context in Cape Town. And so I came to the States just being like, oh, someone who likes women is someone who likes women, and you're going to dress how you're going to dress, and that's what that is. And, you're going to have an affinity towards one type of clothing maybe, or one other type of clothing, but that's just maybe because jeans don't feel great on your legs, and so you don't wear jeans. But then to be here and like, within being queer, you also must answer, okay, now are you a femme? Are you a STEM? Are you a masc presenting person? Da, 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 da. Like that just wasn't an answer I was perhaps ready for, because I was just not, that's just like not a category that one was existing in. So then also not part of my context. So that was a particularly surprising experience for me to kind of, America does tend to force you into a bit of a like, you must categorize yourself and others and the world, and if you don't, like, you can't understand it, as opposed to a more liberal sense of just like, we're all going to exist and we might not all understand each other with using the same dictionary definition for it, but that's like the beauty of this community. So I've been trying to like tie that back into, conversations I have and interactions I have in Philly in general, where, someone will like ask the kind of things that people like to ask about being gay, especially when you're curious and haven't necessarily had a lot of exposure. And my answers tend to come from that global context understanding of what it means to be gay, not just in South Africa, or not just in America, but also in an African context, in a South African context. And so we'll say like, no, I'm not going to tell you I'm only a lesbian or I'm only bisexual, because it doesn't really matter. I'm dating a woman right now, and so that's who I'm interested in. And so until otherwise notified, I'll let you know, keep you updated. But it's not really about that part of things for me. And so I know that, and can acknowledge that for folks who have not grown up in the way that I've grown up, that label is very important and is kind of the defining portion. But yeah, it's been interesting to come into this experience in Philly not from that context, and so to be able to like Africanize and queerify that experience of mine. It's been beautiful in that way.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much, Amir. For the rest of you, based off of what Amir just said, what have your experiences been both here and abroad in terms of the use of labels? Amir just said that basically America is explosive with labels. We like to label and categorize everything. Did you feel that same sense in terms of language in your study abroad countries, or not? Was there more a liberal understanding and less of this urgency of putting people in these different boxes, even within, and under the big rainbow umbrella? What do you think?
I think now that you mention it, Amir, in my time abroad, I can look back on it now, and there definitely was more like generalized boxes or like categories that you like fit into. I was like lucky enough to be able to become friends with a lot of people my age in Oviedo, and it was never necessarily brought up like, oh, like you are like this type of gay man or that type of like lesbian woman, and it was just like you are you. And we accept you for that. So yeah, that's interesting. I'll be thinking about that more in the future, I think, I definitely have that sentiment of, it's interesting coming from a place where you're so categorized and going abroad and suddenly like that weight isn't there anymore. That's definitely interesting and something that like I hope to reflect on now.
Cool. Emma, I saw that you had your self unmiked.
Yeah. I guess my experience in Japan when I went as a mask presenting lesbian and someone who doesn't kind of conform to gender with clothing, I was definitely like, and I have like tattoos, so I was like, okay, they're gonna be staring at me. I mean, they stare at foreigners in general, but if anybody's upset with your presence, it's because you're a foreigner. It's not because they can identify you as gay just by looking at you. So I think I was worried about like people's interpretation of me, and that upsetting someone, which isn't really, you shouldn't be worried about, your presence upsetting someone just because you're gay. So I think for the most part, in a country like Japan that was not colonized and was not taken over by Christianity, it was very refreshing to be around people who were not necessarily thinking about it from like a political standpoint, because they are a private culture, and it was just kind of like, you do you, I'm gonna do me, whatever. But getting away from the Christianity, hyper conservative political hatred that a lot of gay people face in America, it was nice to not have to worry about that aspect, I guess.
Thanks so much, Emma. I'm noticing our time, so I want to make sure we get through as many questions as possible. So did aspects of your identity play a role in determining your housing while abroad? So is there any part of your identity that really informed maybe your housing? Whoever wants to go first.
I had both of the abroad programs I went on, it was mandatory to do homestays. I kind of already touched on this, but it was definitely scary going into it. Going into a different culture is always scary, but then having to be implemented into a family that's not your own, that you hope maybe to like have that sort of familiar connection with by, maybe the end of your experience. And you hope to be able to share as much of your experience and life thus far with them, but you never really know like what you're going to be able to share with them. I will say, I think Education Abroad did an amazing job pairing me with my family, obviously. But I think it's, important to recognize that some people, might not have that same experience that I did. However, I think, it's navigable. And, but housing, I mean, for me, it was just, another experience of going abroad. I was going to learn more about the culture and whatever it brought with it for me. Yeah, I don't have any more to say.
Thanks, Liam. Yeah, what about Chiara or MG? What was your housing experience like? And did you think about your identity in terms of wondering like, what is this housing experience gonna provide me with?
I can go. So at the time, I was like, I had like long hair and everything, dressed more like feminine. So I didn't like have any fears, like just because like people didn't like question me or anything like that. So with their housing, they have like a building for females and a building for males. So and I also got my own room. So at the end of the day, I didn't really have any like problems. But if I were to go back now, I'd probably feel like fear and like, because like even if I go to like the bathroom now, like sometimes like girls get scared or something because they're like they'll like double check if they're in the right bathroom or be like, oh, hello, like, or like say something. And yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much, MG. I think that also gender expression can play such a huge part in this too, right? And so how you're showing up in the world, or how people are perceiving that you're showing up in the world, can definitely dictate comfort, safety, inclusion. Yeah, Chiara, go ahead.
So my housing was kind of chosen for me. I was in the Temple Rome, apartment building. So I had 3 roommates that were chosen for me. And whenever I get new roommates, I always have that little voice in the back of my head of like not wanting to make them uncomfortable because I am a bisexual woman. So there's always a part of me that's a little concerned or nervous that my presence may make them uncomfortable sharing a space with them. But I was very fortunate to actually have another bisexual roommate who was very open and unapologetic about her identity. And she kind of, through her, I was able to experience more of like Rome's LGBTQ plus community because she was very engaged in that and wanted to know more about it. And because she was open to our roommates, I was able to be open to my roommates. So I think that was very beneficial for me to have that in my environment.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. A couple last quick questions. So in terms of actually engaging with the local LGBT community, what was your experience like? Were you able to find it? Were you not able to find it? And how did you navigate that? I know that Emma, you said it didn't really happen for you outside of the context of American students. Other folks, did you have an opportunity to engage with local LGBT communities or not really?
Oh, sorry. I can touch a little bit on this. I actually, my friends and I did find a place right by the Coliseum called Coming Out Roma. And that was great to go to because all the employees were part of the LGBTQ community and most of the customers were as well. And they were open from breakfast all the way to late at night. So it was great to kind of, see that in the environment of local Italians going to this place. And I wish I discovered it sooner because we only found it on week 5 out of 6. I was only there 6 weeks. So I wish I had been able to go there more. I only went twice, but that was very, comforting for me to know that, they're out there and that, there's always going to be people that accept you. I think that was really important for me to see, regardless of where you are in the world, that's a possibility. It was just really important for me to see that.
Excellent. I already saw, Suzanne, you're ahead of the game in the chat. Any additional advice that any of you would like to give any students considering studying abroad related to LGBT identity? What would you recommend? What tips, tricks, pro tips, pointers, things you wish you'd known before going in? What advice can you offer our audience here?
Something like more on the personal side for me of like my experience and how that could apply. I think if you're considering studying abroad, like I tell everybody to do it. I know from a mental health standpoint, as a queer person, it was really, really refreshing to get out of, Pennsylvania, to get away from my family for a little bit, to get away from religion for a little bit. And I was feeling a little hopeless during the pandemic. And even though I was still traveling during the era of the pandemic, it was really the refresh that I needed to get out and to experience new things. And I think that it was definitely the most alive that I have ever felt. And I'm sure that a lot of other queer people have experienced anxiety or depression and might feel a little bit trapped here. And I think that for myself and my health and getting to learn about myself as a person, I think you can grow a lot as a person and as a queer individual by studying abroad. So I totally recommend.
Thanks so much for that, Emma. Absolutely. Yeah, any other advice, folks, our panelists, that you'd like to offer up?
Yeah, just one thing is like, since I kind of went in already with the mindset that I was gonna just kind of not really talk about my identity, I didn't really look into the LGBT community before studying abroad. So I didn't know about these places like Coming Out Roma until like way later. So just, talking to peers who have studied abroad, who may know places, looking into it even just by Googling, because I think that it was a really fundamental moment for me to see that my expectation was different from my reality. So finding those spaces where you can be yourself, I think, is really important.
Thanks so much for that, Chiara. Yeah, I think what I've heard from all of you is that studying abroad also made you somewhat more comfortable or give you freedom to explore your identity outside the context of America, where everything is a label and like, so I think I'm part of this community, but I don't know which brand, which variety, which type. And so what I've heard from many of you is that studying abroad offered you kind of the freedom to explore and to say like, it doesn't matter, or I'm gonna figure this out without feeling like the social pressure of, of being here in Philadelphia, being at Temple, Philadelphia campus, with the exception of Amir, who's studying abroad here in some ways. But so thank you all so much. I think it's time to turn it over to questions. And it looks like there's a bunch going on in the chat.
Yeah, I'd be happy to read some of these out.
Great, thanks.
So I believe we answered Suzanne's. However, if anyone would like to at some point offer up any other advice for members of the community preparing to go abroad, feel free at any point during this. My Lamb asks, how do you address someone respectfully in the country where you traveled? So I guess some examples from you all in the language spoken in your host country. Like, is it similar to Mr. and Mrs. or by name? Do they have those gendered, what do you call them, salutations, whatever they are? Or is it just by name? Could anyone speak to that?
My experience, sorry, Mir. My experience, of course, like I was in a Spanish-speaking city, and it is very common to assume gender based on appearance. I personally don't have the perspective of having to possibly correct someone's assumptions about my gender. However, in my experience throughout the city, it's normal to use the salutation for we'll use that word for the person based on their appearance. However, of course, around, maybe young people, you would be able to, maybe ask pronouns, like at the beginning of a conversation, which isn't an experience I was able to have, but, would look at like having going forward.
Was there anyone else who wanted to share for that question?
I can say something. I was just thinking about how, so I don't really have an answer that you all wouldn't already have heard of, being likely that everyone's in Philly or has been. But I was thinking, well, have been thinking about gendered language kind of in general for a while. I worked at a summer camp this summer, which was really diversity, equity, inclusion focused. And a lot of our emphasis was on gendered spaces and what that looks like and how to kind of phase that out of the existence that we are in. And yes, it's really important to me. And I think I would encourage you all who are listening to look into how gendered language plays a part in how you interact with the world, even in America, because I think at a certain point we can become, especially like I've said before, in a liberal arts institution, can become like a bit of a glass dome, in that we think like, oh, we're doing so amazing, and all of our we're using super gender inclusive language, and what is it then like in another country where that's like not as much the case? Like we're actually not doing that great ourselves, and there are lots of other countries in the world where which are much more gender inclusive than America is, and I'm sure a lot of people know already that that's America's not rated super well in that department. But I would really encourage folks to think about how they use the word guys, like hey guys, you guys, this and that, or even dude, or just the ways that you would address a group, and then also using they them pronouns for everyone until you have a chance to ask or they disclose what their pronouns are, that I've only recently in the last 6 months seen implemented into wider temple based stuff. So I would love to see that in just generic conversation with everyone. Yeah, that's what I have to say about that.
Thanks, Amir. I'll move on to another question. So maybe Chiara could speak to Juju's question a little bit. So is approaching queer people, is there maybe that similar sense of worry? Am I going to offend someone if I don't know that they're queer? If are they going to think that I'm assuming they are and they're going to be offended by that? Or was there any fear, or did you have any experience doing that? And share whatever you're comfortable with in terms of personal experiences.
Yeah, of course. So like everybody, everybody's different with their comfortability and their identity. So I would say, if you're in these queer spaces, for example, coming out Roma, I would assume that it's more comfortable because you're in this queer space. So I would doubt that anyone would be offended that you assume they're queer if they're in, a space where a majority of the people in the room are queer. But my roommate did go on a date with a woman who, was closeted. Her friends did not know, that she was a part of the community, and she was not comfortable with her friends knowing. And it's only because I guess we were Americans that she was never going to see again that she was comfortable with that. So I wouldn't recommend assuming somebody who's just out on the street is part of the community unless they approach you or they tell you that they are, because it's something that people in Italy and in Rome can be very private about. So I would be sure that maybe you're in these spaces where they're clearly open about their identity and comfortable with it in that space. I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Chiara. I'm wondering if maybe anyone else could speak to their experience in that sense. So did you, while you were abroad, worry that you might offend someone if you, I don't know, if you wanted to ask them out for lunch or something like that, and maybe a romantic way? I don't know if anyone can speak to that.
So I can.
Oh.
Oh, sorry. Is there like a question or?
Oh, potentially. 1 second. Emma, you can go ahead, and then Fletcher, if you wouldn't mind waiting until Emma responds, and then we'll take your question.
No problem.
Thanks.
Okay. So answering Charlotte's question in the chat as well. Definitely Japanese culture is pretty reserved. I talked to somebody ahead of time about what dating was like there. And she was saying that PDA is not really socially accepted, whether that's with a straight couple or a gay couple. And, there's a lot of business that surrounds dating with the love hotels and there's some sketchy stuff in Tokyo that maybe is not not exactly queer friendly spaces. Like I felt like there was a huge lack of queer friendly spaces. And dating apps are still used in Japan, but a lot of people have privacy things and won't show their faces on dating apps. So I would say my 2 tips are, if you are on dating apps and are looking to message people online, please be careful about meeting up with strangers in a new city. And my recommendation would be, don't date other students in the dorm. It gets messy very fast. So that was my, that was what I observed while I was there, but definitely just be safe and have fun.
Thanks, Emma. Fletcher, did you have a question to ask the panelists? Are they still here? Oh. I'm not seeing them anymore. Okay. Did anyone else have a question to ask our panelists today? No. Jen, did you have any remaining questions to ask?
We covered so much ground, but yeah, since we didn't get to all the questions on my list, why do you think, so, beyond gaining just a global perspective, why do you think it's important specifically for LGBT students to study abroad? What is it about that global perspective that enhances your understanding, the skills that you're going to be using from there? So can you speak, if anyone feels comfortable speaking about why you think specifically it's important for LGBTQ students to study abroad? What is there to be gained from that in this way?
I think it's generally known that the United States is somewhat in like this bubble of, we have a lot of tension and turmoil, especially regarding LGBTQ plus identity. So I think it's just super interesting to take a step outside that bubble. I think you're gonna not only be able to experience your identity in another country, in another environment. However, you'll be able to look into where you were coming from, the United States, from a different lens, since you're not like actually in it. It's always really interesting to watch news abroad. So I think, you're not only going to be able to learn more about other cultures and the culture that you're studying abroad in, but you'll learn a lot about the United States in general, and maybe how they're viewed, how we're viewed, in a world context.
Yeah, I think that's really important. It's definitely fascinating. I mean, just to do an experiment, don't read any American news, even while you're here in America. Read news from different foreign outlets and correspondence. It is a very remarkably different experience, right? So also learning not only about the culture that you're immersed in abroad, but learning a lot about the culture that you live in more often. So yeah, what other folks have any thoughts or ideas about why it might be important for LGBT students specifically to study abroad and the uniqueness of their experience?
Yeah, I wanted to say that I really agree with what Liam said, kind of taking a step out of your life and maybe the societal pressures and maybe family pressures you feel about your identity, and kind of being able to step out of that and be with a group of peers that are accepting of you. And it really, for me personally, it allowed me to feel like what it's like to be fully out, and that is a possibility for me here in America, and that like I will be accepted by people. And being fully out, when I got back, I was like, I want to feel like that all the time. And it really pushed me to talk to my dad about my identity, to really have a conversation with my parents. And I know everybody's experience is unique and different, but for me, it pushed me in a very positive direction.
Thanks so much, Chiara. MG, I saw you nodding your head a lot to what Chiara was saying.
Yeah, I definitely agree with her. I was going to say that I think even though there can be a lot of fear that you're going to a whole new country without exactly knowing how you're going to be treated, it can build your confidence. Personally, that's what it helped me with, because I did go in like hesitant, like about like being open and stuff like that. But like students I like studied with, they like were like open with me first. They were like, oh, what do you prefer, like, and stuff like that. And I was like, oh wow, like I never expected that. And I could just be open, and like just made me more comfortable. And then when I came back here, I was like, oh wow, I can be more myself.
Oh, thanks so much. I mean, it sounds like from what I'm hearing, y'all got a chance to practice having these conversations in a space that was a little more anonymous, a little bit more removed, a little bit where you didn't worry about making mistakes as much, like, am I using the right words, or being able to have these conversations that are a little bit more vulnerable in service of like building connections. Does that resonate for folks? That's super awesome. I think that maybe is one of the hallmarks then for LGBT students specifically getting the opportunity to study abroad, is to practice having these vulnerable conversations without having to see the same people every single day and worrying if it doesn't go well. Yeah, and if you think about your experience living in another culture and meeting the local residents, what did you learn about the regional history or politics or societal norms that maybe prompted you to reflect on your own identity or other facets of yourself? So what did you learn about yourself while you were not here in Philadelphia? Or anything? I definitely know that for me, when I've traveled, I have learned, I mean, I try to practice and learn new gender and sexuality words every single day, but I have usually taken so much back about how the impact language has on creating identity, period. And so just how many words a particular culture has for something that's either really important or not that important to a culture, and how that word might be gendered or not gendered, and how language is the first thing that plants seeds for then how we kind of understand the world. So for me, I always think that learning from local residents, both about the words that they use to talk about their politics, that frame their arguments, the words that they use to describe the food that they eat and how they cook it or how they make it. I mean, all that stuff. And where gender plays into that for me is always something that prompts me to reflect on, oh my gosh, it's not just this way. It's not the same way everywhere that is in the US. So that's been something that's been fulfilling for me when I've gotten to travel. I'm hoping to travel soon. Liam, is that a head scratch or just a hand?
Yeah, going off of that, I don't know if this necessarily answers that question, but quickly something that came to my mind was like going abroad. I mean, we hear like gay culture all the time, and gay culture is super rooted in gay people of color. Like they created gay culture for what it is today. And I think it's interesting that it's reflected abroad, like even like in rather homogenous communities. A lot of like the stuff that I see here in the United States is like through media brought over like across across the sea, literally. And that was just like a super interesting reflection that I was like able to just have while you said like with like language. Yeah.
Thanks, Liam. Those are all the questions that I have. So I'll take it back to you, Evan. I think there might be one more question in the chat.
Yeah, real quick, this might be a great way to end if we could hear from a couple panelists really quickly. Suzanne asks, what do you hope those watching who are not members of the LGBTQIA+ community will gain from hearing this discussion and your stories?
I can speak to that a little bit. Yeah, so I think it's so important that like folks who are not a part of the LGBTQIA+ community can kind of get an inside understanding of like what we might be thinking about as folks who are walking through this world, visibly queer, or maybe even not visibly queer, but queer in our heads and our minds and our hearts, like in our experiences of the world. How do we interact with the societies we're living in and the societies we're looking to live in? And how is that materially different? And where does privilege sit in that? So the privilege, like being able to recognize that someone who doesn't have to consider, okay, is my identity illegal in a different country? Will I walk down the street and not be able to hold my significant other's hand simply because of the laws of that country? So the legal aspect of it, but then also that societal aspect, right? So I would hope that someone who's heard this panel today would walk away from it sitting there being like, okay, wow, I maybe have uncovered a piece of my privilege that I didn't quite have as, you know, at the forefront of my interactions with other LGBTQI+ folks. And really have that be something that you're thinking about when interacting with the world. And, you know, maybe you're creating programming for other Temple students, maybe you're walking away from this experience with a Temple student who's in your family, or you are a Temple student yourself. Yeah, I would just hope that, you know, that understanding of your privilege and the way that you exist in the world in comparison to folks who are LGBTQI+. It's different, it's beautiful that it's different, but it is also where privilege sits, and that's important to acknowledge.
Thank you so much, Amir. Would anyone like to add or share anything else before we close out?
I would love to touch on that question just for a moment. I think I just hope that people maybe who are not a part of the community, from our stories here, how important it is to create an accepting environment as maybe a fellow American peer studying abroad with us. I just think that that was so important to my growth, seeing that like my peers were accepting of my identity, for me to feel comfortable and for me to be able to be myself rather than feeling like, yes, this is something I should hide while I'm on this experience.
Well said. Thank you so much, everyone. I think that's all the time we have. And like Dr. J said, we covered a lot of ground, and I am just so thankful that you all came today and shared your stories and answered some hard-hitting questions. So thank you to all the attendees for coming and listening and participating, to Liam, MG, Amir, Emma, and Chiara. Thank you so much. To Dr. J, thank you for moderating this conversation and staying past 5. This was excellent. So yeah, thank you so much. And I just wanted to remind everyone that it is Study Abroad Week. So there are a lot of special events happening. So if you went to studyabroad.temple.edu/SAW, you would be able to look at all of the other events we have happening this week, info sessions for different programs. The Study Abroad Fair in person is tomorrow from 3 to 5 in Tolman Learning Center lobby. And we also have a virtual fair for our partners, so exchanges and external programs on Wednesday. So you can register on our website for all those events and the info sessions. And once again, thank you so much for coming. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
Hi,
you.
everybody.